Hi everybody, it's Miss Neil from Priory Pembroke here, and following on with your local history topic, okay, I'm going to talk you through how to make your very own version of the pop-up City of Lincoln, okay, in the style of Paul Johnson. So I'm going to talk through a PowerPoint, and then the video will follow on with a few sort of practical demonstrations where you'll see me actually measuring things out, applying colour and constructing it all for you. So hopefully you can have a go at home or in the classroom later on. All right, so in your introductory quiz, you now know quite a bit about the City of Lincoln and its wonderful architecture, and we're going to use some of that to create a three-dimensional pop-up of the city. You can obviously don't have to copy exactly where I've put my buildings, and you can use whichever ones you want. So if there's some on here that you would prefer not to use and you want to use some alternatives, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so we have got the Stokes Coffee Shop, which was the Tudor building. We've got the Salvation Army. We've got the Jews House. We've got the courts inside the castle. We've got Ellis Mill. We've got the cathedral, the Tudor building of the Tourist Information Office, which you can see there as well. Then we've got various views of the castle. We've got the empowerment sculpture that we talked about. We've got the art gallery, and we've also got the drill hall, okay, with the face on the side. But there's lots of other ones, so if you want to go and take some photographs or find some alternative images, then please do so. So we're going to have a look at the work of Paul Johnson, who, as you can see, is quite an old chap, but he's wonderfully talented. He's world renowned for his work with literacy with children and pop-up books. So not only is he an artist, he's written quite a few books, and his interest is actually to get children reading. The book's got to be really stimulating, and he thinks if he can create pop-up books with interesting folds and mechanisms and things that really engage children in the book, then they're going to want to read. And I was lucky enough to do a workshop with him a good few years ago now, which is what this project is based on. Okay, so whilst many of his creations at home are in a number of art galleries around the world, to really understand deconstruction, you've got to see them for yourself. They're absolutely amazing. For him, developing his unique style of pop-up and paper engineering has captured the interest of so many children, engaging them in reading. So instead of lots of folded pages, his books are held together with paper piano hinges and dovetail joints, and they pack flat. So you can see that image there, believe it or not, how complicated that pop-up is. It's going to fold completely flat. You'd be able to fit it in an envelope, no problem at all. All right. So there's another one which obviously folds up into a book shape. They're absolutely incredible. He uses dyed watercolour paper, so you're going to use watercolour paper, and we're going to use some inks later on to add some colour to ours. But I took a photograph of the basic construction. So the basic structure for his pop-ups are based on these rectangles. So you can see there from the photograph that those 4 rectangles just slot together. Those black lines that you can see on the 4 rectangles on the right hand side of this slide are just cuts. So the 2 bottom cuts would slot into the 2 top cuts, and I'll show you this in a little bit more detail in the video to follow. But that actually folds flat. So even though that looks quite simple, he then makes them much more complicated by adding more of these. So his rectangles will be longer with lots and lots of crisscrossed rectangles slotting in. So actually it's immense, the amount of squares in this little 3D grid that he actually has. But like I said, it all slots together, and it all folds up completely flat. So he doesn't use any glue. It's all really, really clever slots and those little hinges and sort of hook and eye type things that all slot together. So he doesn't use any glue at all. And once he has an idea for a story, he begins to structure the book. So he goes from a rough model like that to then up to pieces that can have 200 separate little bits of paper that all slot together to make his sort of paper architecture. So like I said, the majority of his structures are made from large sheets of dyed watercolour paper and then cut out and assembled. So you can see that actually in his work, we've got lots of windows, there's pieces that are cut out all together, which is a little bit more tricky, but we'll have a go at that as well. But his work can be found in the collections of the Tate Gallery in London, the Smithsonian Design Museum in New York, the National Gallery and the Library of Congress in Washington, DC. So he's a very, very successful pop-up book artist, as well as somebody who just makes the structures for pure enjoyment as well. So when I did his workshop, we didn't have time in the day to actually apply the colour to the watercolour paper, but we all chose our own theme to create a pop-up structure. So I chose Alice in Wonderland. So you can see there, it's a bit difficult in the photograph. Let me just flick to the next one. It might be a little bit easier. You can see that it's basically the 4 rectangles that I've then changed the shape of and cut into, and cut images from the Alice in Wonderland, so the teapot, the Mad Hatter. If I just go back, you can see the Red Queen. You've got the caterpillar, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, various words, the playing cards, and then Alice, the bit where she's trapped in the house with her hands coming out. But you can see the top of the roof just slots together, her head just slots in, her arms slot in. There's no glue at all, and it really is fascinating, and really, even though it's time consuming, it's really satisfying to actually construct. So this is the type of thing that we are going to create together. So you can see I have started with 4 rectangles, and I'll show you those in a little bit more detail. We'll backtrack in a minute. So this is a photograph of the finished thing. And I've used inks on watercolour paper. Now the beauty of watercolour paper is that it dries flat. You know from painting in your sketchbook or on paper at home that when your paint dries, the paper goes all ripply and wrinkly, and it doesn't lie flat, whereas watercolour paper is designed for watercolour paints and inks. So even though it may be a little bit buckled while the paint's wet, when it dries perfectly flat again. It's quite a nice sort of thickness. It's about nice sort of card thickness. So it's great to work with for this kind of thing. So I've started with my 4 rectangles, and then I've drawn onto the tops of those to alter the height of them by adding my buildings. So you can see I've got the cathedral, I've got all of those buildings that I showed you on the first 2 slides drawn in, and I've thought about how they're going to link together. So I'll show you the actual outline further on in a minute. And you can see one side of my buildings are painted black, so you've got the silhouette. So I've just put black ink on the back. Okay, and then on the front, before I actually applied the colour, I went over all of my design with a black biro. Now it's important you use a biro and not a felt tip pen or a fine liner or something like that, because when we then add the ink, that pen is going to run and you're going to end up with black smudges everywhere. If you press down firmly with your pencil, you should still be able to see the details through the ink that we apply later, and then you can go over it with a black fine liner when it's dry if you want. So it doesn't really matter which way around you do that. But as you can see from the photograph, so that's the back look. We've got the black silhouettes, which again works quite nicely, so you can still identify all the buildings from the silhouettes. And there we go. Okay, so that's how it slots together, so you can see the 4 rectangles successfully there. Okay, so let's break it down a little bit then. So on this slide you can see, and I've sent these photocopies in paper on A3 to your teacher so that they can actually photocopy it for you. So if you want to draw a little bit more accurately and you need this as a bit more of a guide to help you, you can see what my measurements are. And if you want to put, draw the buildings as I've drawn them, that's fine. If you want to do your own thing, that's fine as well. So it is open to creativity, guys. I don't expect you to copy exactly what I've done. But I started out with 4 rectangles, okay, which were 30 centimetres long and 7.5 centimetres high. And I've then added where the cut lines are. Okay, so you can see on the cathedral at the top and the castle, my cut lines are 8 centimetres in and 4 centimetres up. Okay, and there's 2 of them. So there, and there. And then on the bottom 2, the cut lines are at the top. Okay, because that's how they slot together. So we've got a cut line here, and then here underneath the windmill, and here at the edge of the Tudor Stokes Cafe on the High Bridge and the Brayford with the Swan. There's a cut line there which goes 4 centimetres down from the top, but again they're 8 centimetres in from either side. All right, so once you've drawn your rectangles out, okay, on your watercolour paper, you can then start to add the height of the buildings and change the shape of them a little bit and cut into them. Okay, so you should have lots of images of buildings to work from, and then it's just a case of applying the ink, cutting them out and slotting together. So I'll show you how to do all of that in a few minutes. So this is what we're going to create. So hopefully you'll be able to see just how this works a little bit more. All right, so you can see how this all folds flat. So when I pick it up and open it out, all right, you can then see a little bit better how it's made up of those 4 rectangle shapes. All right, and how they just slot together. So you can see that this just unslots like that. So we've got a slot at the top and a slot at the bottom, and they just interlink and swap together. Now obviously Paul Johnson's work is much more complicated. He would add on more rectangles either side and things across the top to make the roof and stuff, but we're just going to keep it quite simple, but our designs are going to look fantastic. All right, so they fold flat, fold open, and are made from 4 rectangles. Okay, so let's break this down a little bit more. So let me just move that out of the way. So these are the 4 rectangles that we're going to need to measure out. So we are working a little bit bigger than this. Okay, but you can see how 2 of them have got slots chopped in at the bottom, 2 have got slots chopped in the top, and when we slide them together, okay, so it's important that the little slits that we cut only go halfway down each of our rectangles. Slot together like that and stand up, but again, this folds flat. All right. Okay, and like I said, if you get really good at this, you can make them really complicated. So this is my Alice in Wonderland one. All right, which again folds flat, even though there's lots more bits to it. If I open it up, you can see where the slots are, and you can see from hopefully this angle that I've got more than just 4 rectangles there. Okay, I've got more of a grid going on. All right, but again, it folds flat, so you can have cut out details if you wish, or you can draw the details on. So either way, but we're going to have a bit of a combination of both, so we can actually see through some elements of our work. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw out that rectangle, and you need 4 of these, so you need to work quite low down towards the bottom of your page. All right, and we're going to measure 30 centimetres, so the length of a ruler. And then we're going to mark 8 centimetres from one end and 8 centimetres from the other end. And then I'm going to measure 7.5 centimetres, all right, up from all of those points. And I'm going to join those up. Go. So this is our middle panel, all right. Our end panels where the buildings go are ever so slightly smaller, but on this one I'm going to have a slot from the bottom measuring 4 centimetres up along that line. So it's important that they are on the 8 centimetre line each time. So if I just make a thicker line there, you can see where my slot's going to be that I need to cut. And there. So 2 of these, okay, will have slots from the bottom measuring 4 centimetres up and 8 centimetres in, and then the other 2 are going to have slots from the top. All right, so we need 4 of those all together, 2 with slots from the bottom, so again 8 centimetres in, 4 centimetres up, 8 centimetres in, 4 centimetres up. And then on the other 2, we're going to go 8 centimetres in, but 4 centimetres down. 8 centimetres in and 4 centimetres down. All right, but we're not going to cut them out yet, because the next thing you need to do is to start to add your details. So if I was going to work on the cathedral, and I've got my plan here, okay, so I did sort of draw around these before I put mine together so you could see. All right, so I've made my cathedral spires 14 centimetres from here, okay, and I've drawn all the windows, which takes a very long time, but you might decide actually you're going to have a cathedral on just one panel. You might put the castle in the middle, you might put the Jew's house here, okay, or you might have a bit of the cathedral front, a bit of the cathedral back with the castle in the middle. It's entirely up to you how you organise your buildings and your Lincoln architecture. Okay, so I'm going to give you a bit of time now to draw all of this out. So I'm going to draw my spires, and I'm going to leave you to draw your buildings coming out the top of your rectangle or the bottom. So for example, if I was doing the Brayford Bridge, right, I've drawn in an archway and I've drawn in a swan, okay, in the bridge, but it could be a boat. It's entirely up to you. So some elements could be cut out, some of the windows could be cut out. All right, so have some fun with that and spend some time drawing it out really, really well. So when you've got everything drawn out on your watercolour paper, we're going to add some colour in the style of the artist Paul Johnson, who we looked at.
And the beauty of using watercolour paper rather than card or regular paper is that it is suitable for wet materials, wet media. So if I use a wet paintbrush, clean water, I'm going to wet the areas that I want to add colour to, which will be all of them to start with, and I'll do you a bit of footage when they're all finished. Okay, but I'm going to use inks rather than paint, just because the inks are really vivid. The drawing inks are nice and bright and you don't need a lot of them. But also it's quite interesting to see what the colours do when you let the inks kind of blend together on the page. So we want some nice, vivid, bright colours going around my swans on my little canal there. Okay, where the empowerment sculpture is. So I'm basically just dropping the colour on while the paper is wet. Those colours bleed and we get some really lovely effects there with the ink. And the beauty of watercolour paper is that it will dry completely flat again, all right? Whereas regular paper does buckle and becomes all sort of wibbly wobbly, which makes it then very difficult to sort of work with afterwards. But because watercolour paper is specifically for paint, wet materials, like inks, and it handles the water really well, so it'll be wet, it'll be dry, it'll be wet, it'll be dry, and it'll be nice and flat. So when this is dry, it'll be lovely and flat again, just like card, which means I can then cut out all of my pieces and I can assemble my 3D pop-up sort of structure. Okay, now on the other side, all right, so you'll notice this, because this is going to be 3D, we are going to see the back of these pieces. So what I've done on the other side is I've already painted black ink on the back. All right, so when we put it together, we'll have that nice contrast of lovely bright colours, all right, with sort of black silhouette shapes when it's all cut out. Okay, so I'm going to get on with that and cut it all out and then show you how it slots together. So now that I've applied ink to the fronts of them all, okay, like I said, don't worry too much about staining the lines because you are going to cut those out, but you can see how beautiful some of the colours are as they've bled together because of the watercolour paper being wet first. And in other areas you can keep it quite sharp by obviously not wetting the paper and then the ink doesn't run. Okay, but I think that'll give a really lovely contrast against the black on the other side when we cut it out and put it all together.
So I've now cut all the pieces out, okay, so you can see I've cut along the outline, so it didn't actually matter that my ink had run past the outline at all. Don't need to worry about that. And I've done this with scissors, so you don't need a craft knife. Okay, I've carefully cut out the doors, I've cut out some of the windows and archways, okay, in each panel. All right, only a little bit there. Okay, but I have carefully cut in and amongst the empowerment sculpture. So you can see I've also cut where my slots go. All right, so I have the slots cut ready. So remember, 2, I've got the slots coming down from the top, 4 centimetres, and 2, I've got the slots coming up from the bottom. So you should now have 4 fantastically coloured and wonderfully drawn, outlined, detailed, with a bit of cross-hatching, etc., ready to slot together. Let's slot it together. And again, you can play around with the order of these. If you put it together and actually it doesn't work that way. Now this bit's a little bit tricky because I need to slide this in here and then interlock those slots there. And again, decide whether you're going to have colour one side, black on the other, all the black silhouettes all facing the same way. So you might want to put it together in a few different ways just to see how it looks. So I'm now going to slot together these 2 pieces here. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to take my last one, I'm going to slot those together. So just interlink those 2 pieces and then carefully moving my little, just it's a fiddly bit, moving my sail out the way of my windmill there so I can slot it into the cathedral. Oh, this is so fiddly. There we go. So be really careful when you're doing this. Obviously, you don't want to rip anything. There we are. Right, let's stand that up. There we go. So just let's give it a little jiggle. And we've got it all slotted together. All right, so you can see it folds flat. And then it pops up. and we've got a fantastic 3D Lincoln City. I can't wait to see yours.